Hello everyone, I am Veos, and welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program video. So in today's video, I built another SSTO. I know, all these freaking SSTOs. I get it. Okay, sorry. I just can't help myself. They're so beautiful. But I just didn't want to build any type of another SSTO. I was inspired by the space shuttle SSTO that I was building, little shuttlecraft SSTO that used the water to not only land, but also to take off from. And I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could build an SSTO that could not only land on water, but also land on land, but at the same time be kind of like all-purpose landing vehicle, except for cliffs or something of that nature. Now I know that water landing vehicles in KSP normally have to have a lot of wing space and a lot of thrust in order to lift up out of the water, because in KSP the water is extremely draggy, so any parts that you have in the water experience a lot of drag. So in order to get enough speed, to get enough lift, in order to take your craft up out of the water requires, well, a lot of thrust and a lot of wing area to, create lift. But of course, with a lot of thrust means you're going to waste a lot of fuel, and a lot of wing space means that you're going to have a lot of drag during atmosphere. It can get a little complicated, a little bit much, or a little too much. But however, there is a way around this. If you're able to build a craft that can go under the water, like the little shuttlecraft that I was working on that I made a video about, if you can go under the water and then accelerate underneath the water pointing upwards, your buoyancy will actually throw you out of the water in the KSP game world. And if you have enough oomph, you can then take off from there without having to worry about trying to fly through the waves or get enough wing lift. You can basically just dart deep underneath the water and then shoot straight out like a ICBM missile coming out of a submarine. However, the real question is, how do you actually dive under the water? The water in KSP is extremely buoyant when it comes to the parts that you use to build crafts with. So attempting to dive under the water either requires a crap ton of thrust again, or a lot of heavy parts, a lot of weight. And of course, weight is an SSTO's worst nightmare. Well, back in the day, I was playing around with using fairings to cut drag, because if a part is stored inside of a fairing, that part's calculations and physics are neutralized because it shows the part as stowed away. This neutralization not only affects the drag of the craft or the part through the atmosphere when it's inside the fairing, but also affects everything else. Buoyancy calculations, all that stuff, except for, of course, weight. I tested this out by taking the fairing off of the craft and trying it that way, and of course it made the craft super buoyant. But then I put the fairing back on, and suddenly I'm able to dive under the water. Albeit there's a little problem because it kept on trying to bob nose down and ass up. I'm trying to figure out to myself, what is making it do this? If all the parts are calculated to be stowed away and the only thing that's being calculated is the weight and not the drag or the buoyancy of the parts, why is it bobbing up like it's got air in its ass? Then it kind of dawned on me that even though the parts that are contained within the fairing are neutralized, the actual fairing part itself isn't, as well as everything behind it. So I had to take the craft and completely tear it apart and put it all back together again, trying to put the absolute center of the craft as the main focus point for the center of mass, as well as the center of buoyancy. So to do this, I had to take two fairings and put the beginning of these fairings in the middle of the craft, and then have them stretch the fairing outwards from the middle to front and then middle to back. This allowed all the parts starting from the middle, going front, and middle going back, to be neutralized when it comes to buoyancy, only leaving the middle part as the only buoyant part in the whole craft. So that way I could teeter back and forth like a seesaw, allowing the craft to not only nosedive but be able to stay stabilized in the water. After a few tries, I realized that the craft simply did not have enough thrust to keep itself in the air as soon as it popped out of the water. So I had to go back to the drawing board and put some more engines on it, more boosters. To help with lift and stability, I took the wings and tilted them up a little bit, and as well as gave them more dihedral design. And for the rapiers, I did that drag drag trick in the very back, well, the neutralization of drag in the back. On a rapier, there's a little green attachment node. If you leave that node unattached, or if you leave that node bare, it will create a whole lot of drag. Now, back in the day, I did a little bit of research on this. If you have a small dynamic nose cone and then the tiny dynamic nose cone, both of them give similar results. The small aerodynamic nose cone might give slightly better results, but not by much. So if for this particular build, I went for the cool factor, and I like how the little tiny aerodynamic nose cone has like a little spike sticking out in the back of the rapier when you push it in just a little bit. It covers that attachment node just fine, and it also has a neat little spiky bit pointing out the back. Put some batteries and reaction wheels in the bottom of the craft, and that actually seemed to work. Now, even though it seemed to work, I had not really tested it out yet with a full payload of Kerbals and all their junk, or the stuff that they usually come with. I think it's the EVA pack and the parachutes, which adds a lot of weight. So now came the trial and error of just trying to figure out how to get this thing into space. What's its flight profile? What works the best? And it looks like in order to get out of the water, you need to go at least about 20-degree angle straight up. Well, not straight up, but sideways 20 degrees after diving down to about 300 to 400 meters, which interestingly enough, I was diving and didn't seem to get any pressure notification. And I'm wondering if the fairing also covers that up, like, as stowed away, like I said before. If it covers that calculation up, the pressure calculation up for the parts as well. Or maybe I had it turned off in settings, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. So you dive down about 300, 400 meters plus, and then you start tilting the nose up about 20 degrees, and you shoot out of the water, and you just kind of keep that heading until you build up enough speed to where you're not falling back down towards the water. And as you're as you're trying to gain speed, you tilt the nose back down to about 0 degrees. Now, when your nose is about 0 degrees and you reach about 250, about 300 meters per second, while you're keeping the nose at 0 degrees, then let go of the WASD keys and just let SAS keep it at that angle of attack. And as it goes faster and faster and faster, and Kerbin starts falling away underneath of the craft, you'll naturally start pointing upwards. And then when your apoapsis is about 45,000 meters, then click on the prograde icon. That way you can start turning that thrust into speed, start burning fuel purely for speed. And of course, once you get to about 75,000 apoapsis, go ahead and turn off your engines, coast up to that point, and then do an orbital insertion burn. Simple. So surprisingly enough, there was actually a lot of fuel left over from this launch, which is good because it means I have a lot of Delta V to spare for maneuver nodes and docking with certain things. And speaking of docking, I went ahead and tested the docking maneuverability of the spacecraft by rendezvousing with the space station that was left by the Star Raker, if you guys remember the Star Raker from a little bit back then. And of course, after docking with the Star Raker, it was just a really very beautiful sight, and I had to make a little cinematic of it. But once the docking was done, we went ahead and landed the spacecraft, and I came across an island that kind of reminded me of the Kerbal version of the Bahamas. Turned around, found a good parking spot, and attempted to land in the water, because that's what this thing is being, designed for. But it landed kind of hard. Not hard enough to break anything, but I'm definitely gonna have to work on the landing bit since this thing doesn't have that much wings, so it's not a glider in any sense of the word. I might add a few more wings just to make it glide so it doesn't land so hard in the future. I can imagine all the Kerbals having some sort of equivalent of shoulder restraints like you'd see in a roller coaster, but still a little hard. But anyway, that's it for this video, for this Kerbal Space Program SSTO, underwater SSTO video. Let me me know what you think in the comments below. Remember that all of the mods are in the description if you're curious of what kind of mods I run. And if you really liked what you saw, please leave a like for the YouTube algorithm. And if you really loved what you saw, consider subscribing. I upload often, mostly Kerbal Space Program stuff. Sometimes I stream. We also have a membership program if you're interested. If you become a member, you get cool little emojis and badges and stuff next to your name and whatnot. Pretty cool, check it out. But anyways, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being a part of this channel. Love you all, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. Bye-bye.